A short disclaimer before jumping into the podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the interview guest in this podcast are solely their own and do not in any way represent the views, opinions, or position of any organization with which the guest is or has been affiliated. All statements made by the guest reflect their personal standpoints only. Hi, welcome and grüezi to a fresh episode of Governance Unplugged, Internal Audit, Risk and Controls. I'm Thomas Michel and I'm glad you're tuning in for what promises to be a timely and very interesting conversation today. The episode's title is Beyond the Hype, Using AI with Integrity in Internal Audit. Artificial intelligence is just everywhere, but what does that actually mean for internal audit? In this episode, we explore not just the potential, but also the risks, misconceptions, and ethical challenges AI brings into our profession. We will be asking, can AI truly transform internal audit, or is it still more a bust than a benefit? What blind spots, biases, and pitfalls should we be watching out for? And how do we hold on to professional skepticism in a world where answers are increasingly shaped by machines? To help unpack all this, I'm joined once again by Gavin Martin, a seasoned internal audit executive who witnessed how emerging technologies have shaped and reshaped the function over the years. Gavin, welcome back and great to have you here.
Thanks, Thomas. It's wonderful to be back with you again today on a deeply important topic, artificial intelligence and audit's role in relation to it. So I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation. And once again, hello to everyone that's listening.
So, Gavin, let's jump directly into it. AI is making headlines everywhere, from ChatGPT in our browsers to machine learning in fraud detection. But cutting through the noise, what's AI really doing for internal audit today? And just as importantly, what isn't it doing?
Thomas, great questions as ever. I think I'll try and break it down actually relatively simply as to how I look at it as a subject. For me, there's two things that I see artificial intelligence doing for an internal audit function. And I'll break them into efficiency, and particularly efficiency improvements and how AI can help, and effectiveness, helping internal audit to reach better audit opinions, maybe richer, deeper audit opinions more quickly. And of course, there's elements where AI can help with both efficiency and effectiveness. Having said that, there's clearly also the distinction between how AI can help internal audit deliver its mandate in the best possible way, becoming more efficient and more effective, and what internal audit needs to be doing to be auditing artificial intelligence out in the organization. And there again, I'd say real questions that audit need to be focused on is, are the business trying to improve their efficiency, or are they trying to improve their effectiveness, or both? And understanding that before you go and ask the questions about how are we auditing this particular new technology where it's implemented.
So if I get this right, it's not about replacing auditors with algorithms. It's about amplifying our thinking, extending our reach, and unlocking new ways to generate insights. Would you agree that AI then, when used right, is less a substitute and much more a strategic sidekick for the internal auditor? Is that right, Gavin?
Yeah, I think I've not really thought about the words, substitute, sidekick in that way before, Thomas. I mean, the way I've looked at it is actually probably very similar words that I think about individuals, particularly auditors, being artificial intelligence aware and artificial intelligence equipped. And so if they really understand what the different types of artificial intelligence today can do, and maybe what's coming in the future, then that awareness can really help them work out which ones can give us efficiency gains, which ones improve our effectiveness. And if they're AI equipped, then they become really good at using those powerful tools. And I have no idea really on what the balance might be in the future, to be perfectly honest, about to what extent does AI replace auditors. I mean, clearly, the more you make internal audit efficient, the fewer auditors you might need to achieve the same goals. But at the same time, what's in my mind is, are internal audit today achieving everything that they could achieve? Are there more opinions that they could be giving? So freeing up all this time, I've always found in the past, means that there are different opinions that we can be giving, deeper opinions, topics that internal audit hasn't touched. And so I think there's going to be plenty for the humans to continue to do. So I don't know where it will end up, but I haven't over my career seen internal audit being ever asked to do less. So my guess is, as many auditors, they'll just be doing very different things.
You mentioned AI being a tool. So if you hold on to that thought for a second and look at AI being the new shiny tool in our kit box, what is beneath the glossy surface? Where do you see the biggest blind spots or hidden traps when audit teams start leaning too heavily on these technologies? Or what risks should we be watching that aren't immediately obvious?
The biggest one for me, Thomas, is that people lose sight of the outcome, as I said, that the tool is trying to achieve. So we started off with a lot of artificial intelligence that was things like robotic process automation, taking very straightforward tasks, getting more and more complex, obviously, but replacing what a human would do with what a system can do in that person's place. And that could be going and finding a particular presentation that was produced in the business, finding a particular slide in that presentation that has certain MI in it, extracting all of that MI, putting it into an email and sending that email to somebody so they didn't have to go and do all of that themselves. And that is great for repetitive tasks. That's the same task every time that follows, a set of rules. And if you understand that outcome, you can, as an auditor, test, is the AI achieving that outcome? As you go further and you start to go to the effectiveness, and here I think much more is where it comes into the generative AI advances we're seeing, where the AI is predicting the next step. It is creating new content. Then you start to get into needing to understand that I'm asking this AI to produce maybe the first draft of an audit report from everything that's in the audit system. Actually, I want that audit report to influence people in the business. Does the AI even know anything about my stakeholder? Are they aware what is likely to influence them? Is my stakeholder motivated by fear? Are they motivated by money? Are they motivated by some other factors? And so the ability of it to create an audit report which influences the business is very different from its ability to create an audit report very quickly. And so the first bit is really, did we understand the outcome that we wanted the AI to help us with? And are we really thinking about all of those outcome aspects? And is it achieving them? And when you know that, you can start to break down, did I have the right data being put into the AI machine? Did I have the right algorithm? Do I understand what the black box is doing? So for me, that's you use the phrase lurking beneath the surface. It really is relevant to understand what is lurking beneath the surface of this AI and is it achieving the outcome? So that's the first one. The second one that I think really comes through as we've hit the world of generative AI is many of these tools are now being described as being almost companions. Your trusted advisor. I mean, Microsoft call it your co-pilot. It's quite a grand term for a professional person that normally sits next to the pilot. I mean, quite often the co-pilot is the thing that is flying the plane, the person that flies the plane. What worries me here is actually authority bias. So to what extent do we convey on the artificial intelligence that this clever machine that does all of these things is very professional, it's authoritative, it has the answers, and as a result we lose our professional skepticism, another phrase you used at the beginning of the program. And I know that a human is far more likely to let an individual into their house if they turn up with an official-looking, high-visibility jacket on and say they're from a utility company and they need to inspect your electricity system, then if the person doesn't have a high-visibility jacket on, that authority bias that we have is really likely to come through with these powerful tools, and we'll simply trust the output and lose our professional skepticism. And that worries me. Not to stop using the tools, but how do we make sure people are equipped to avoid that bias that is likely to come in?
That's such a crucial point. Just because something appears neutral doesn't mean it's actually accurate or complete. At the end of the day, human judgment still needs to be at the center to ask the right questions, to interpret and to challenge what AI is telling us. And sometimes that part gets lost, especially under time pressure. Ironically, AI can speed things up so much that we at the end, we start to rushing and might be leaning a little bit too heavily on what is given to us. So let's be honest, there's a lot of internal pressure on teams right now to jump on the AI train, sometimes just to look like they're keeping up. So in your view, Gavin, what really separates thoughtful, responsible approaches to AI from one that's just reacting or rushing in without a clear strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think my view on AI is it's a train that everyone needs to be on. I know that internal audit functions will be at very different places in terms of the journey they're on. Organizations are at very different places, and sometimes internal audit has to be at best a fast follower of what the organization is allowing, although I like to think of it as needing to be agitating the organization as well to be doing the right adoption, because it's no good being a fast follower with an organization that is making no progress. It is inevitable. AI is in our everyday life. It has been in our everyday lives for some time, whether it's the Siri assistant or Alexa or whatever it is. These things have been around now for a while in terms of the lifespan of artificial intelligence. Certainly a lot of progress since 2010. But before that, I mean, first AI discussions were going on in the 1950s. So, people have been thinking about this for a long time. It's made a lot of advances. For me, I don't think people can make a choice of not to go with AI. Their employees are going to be using it. They're either going to be using it inside an organization because the organization is using it, or they will be using aspects of it outside the organization. They might be doing that by not compromising any of the organization's data. They can still find out a huge amount. How do I audit AML? I can ask today ChatGPT, and it tells me based on the information that's in the outside world. I can ask even better questions than that one. So it's inevitable that people are going to be using it. So I think you talked about responsible adoption, reckless experimentation. What would be reckless adoption and responsible experimentation as well as counterpoints? And I think everyone should be thinking about how do we experiment with this in the right way? How do we then adopt what we think is really useful to us? And I'll come back to my core thing from earlier. What outcomes am I looking to achieve with AI? Which ones are pure efficiency gains? And that can be saving time or money, or both. If I save money, I become a potentially cheaper audit function, which is good for the organization, or I can do more for the same money. If I save time, then I can ask the auditors with their skills in a function to use that time on something much less administrative, something where maybe they just sat at their desk and thinking about the risks of the organization. And so I get a better overall set of work from those auditors. If it is really about effectiveness, then we've got to get people asking much deeper questions. And I'll give you the one example of many audit functions either have done it or are experimenting with creating the audit report using natural language processing tools. So analyze what's in the audit file and create a first draft report using the house style, which has been told to the AI, using this report layout to this type of audience, using this level of language. The first thing that people should think about, though, is everything that the audit team discovered on the audit that's relevant in the audit file? Because if not, the AI cannot see it. And if it cannot see it, it cannot think about it to go into the report. So that's no different to the challenge of a question you'd ask the business. What data is your AI using? If the data is not available to it, it cannot use it. And so you might end up with the wrong outcome from whatever it is you ask the AI to do. So it's a very different question set that people need to think about for the responsible experimentation, and really knowing, am I generating something useful? Once they've done it, they then need to think, what do I expect the auditor still to do? Ideally, read through that report that's generated and say, is this covering everything that we did in the audit that I wanted to cover? How will it influence my stakeholders to act, to think? What do I want them to do? And is it achieving that outcome? And if they take the path of least resistance, the lazy option, and just say, the very clever machine generated it, therefore the very clever machine must be right, yeah, they'll save a lot of time, but ultimately at some point, audit will have a problem on its hands that the report that went out the door was not the right report.
So it's fair to say it's not about chasing the trend, but it's making sure that AI is grounded in a real need, smart choices, and a meaningful outcome. Is that fair to say, Gavin?
Yes, it is. I'd add another bit, which is organizations should be really aware. There are lots of individuals that have seen the great things that AI can do. They're joining organizations because they want to be using these tools. They want to be seeing how it makes their working life different. And so I'd also caution organizations to be a little bit careful that they're recruiting, very excited individuals that want to be using all of this. And then, maybe the nervous audit team says, we're not really going to make strides on this. Think how that makes those employees feel. Are they proud to go and tell their friends and relatives where they're working? Or did they want to be talking about actually using some of the latest advances to do the right thing in the right way? So I think there's a lot that also to think about. Being on the journey properly can really excite and motivate employees that it's a forward-thinking organization. It's trying to make the best of technological advances, whilst really educating auditors about the role that we've always had, probably the most professionally skeptical people in an organization. And so it mustn't lose that job.
That is a great point, which brings me to the next topic. How can internal audit evaluate AI-driven business processes? I mean, AI is not just a buzzword anymore. It's shaping real decisions in credit scoring, in pricing, even in HR decisions such as hiring. From an audit perspective, how do we begin to assess the integrity of AI-driven processes to provide assurance that they are actually working as they're supposed to work?
And for me, Thomas, it's no different from anything I think I've done in my career when I've been auditing a process, and the questions I would ask my teams as well, which is, I'll come back to outcome. What is the real business thing that we are trying to do and trying to achieve with this AI, with this solution? And for me, that's no different to, what is it we're trying to achieve with these 500 people in a call center that are dealing with customer calls? What is the business reality, the thing that we are looking to achieve? When you understand that, the outcome you're trying to drive, very quickly you get to, well, do I have the right information? Have I got the right data set? Do I understand what's happening in the black box in the middle? And you don't have to look too far to find examples where people haven't understood it and the data set contains biases. I then get into what are the two questions that I've also asked on risk over my career. Who could do what, or what could go wrong? And in this case, the who could do what is really, the AI could do what? What could go wrong? And just brainstorming some of those things. So if I had a data set that contained flaws and I'm modeling something, could my data set come up with the wrong conclusions? And a great example in the fraud set was, I think, an organization that fed fraud data into a AI tool. And that fraud data was skewed towards saying that older people were more likely to commit fraud. And so guess what? When it was trying to spot fraud detection patterns, older people were challenged more on fraudulent transactions. Not because they were more likely to be fraudulent, but just the data set wasn't the right data set. But without doing that understanding of what is this AI trying to achieve, it's very hard to ask the right questions about who could do what or what could go wrong as a result of implementing this. I come back very quickly to my example on the audit report. I mean, it doesn't and shouldn't take any of the listeners too long to work out. If I ask a tool to summarize the information that's in an audit file into an audit report, one big risk we have is if the information is not in the audit system, it cannot be summarized. I mean, that's not I think, a far leap for people to take. And it's really not different when you start looking at AI out in a business.
So it sounds like evolving our audit approach, it's not just about adding new tools, but much more. It's about shifting our perspective to ask the right questions, and sometimes probably uncomfortable questions about AI. Or in other terms, to audit AI meaningfully, we need to rethink more than just our techniques. We need to challenge our assumptions too. Is that right?
Yes, and I would say that, I would class these as the real core of auditing that I think goes back to, when I started my career and, I started auditing with pencil and paper, and that might feel like a very long time ago to people, but this was 1993. It's not that long ago. And, a couple of years later, yes, we got laptops, but, in a relatively short space of time, we've gone on this major technological shift. But the fundamentals for me of auditing have not changed about thinking about what a process, what a system is trying to achieve, and then really asking the right professionally skeptical questions about it, having a think through who could do what could go wrong. And I think probably I'd describe it as we need to really, hone those skills now more than ever, and avoid the illusion that can come with great technological advances that these things must be doing it right because they're very clever, they're very powerful. I remember someone saying to me, a big problem with a computer program, the great thing is it will do exactly what you tell it to do each time. If the coding is wrong, it will do exactly the wrong thing every single time. And so, it is, yes, they can be brilliant, but of course it could do the wrong thing. And with AI, you introduce the risk of drift. The AI tool itself is updating how it thinks and operates now over time. It might have done the right thing 6 months ago, but now as it's learned, it's no longer doing the right thing. And so you have to think about those possibilities, a bit like auditing a control framework. How has this control framework changed over time? When people left, did the skills diminish? Are things not being done anymore? That's for me control framework drift, which is no different to AI model drift in how I think about it from an auditing sense.
This raises a bigger questions around readiness. Do today's audit teams have what it takes to audit AI with confidence? And if not, what capabilities do we need to grow, both technically and culturally?
For me, I think there's a lot of the right education, training, awareness, however that wants to be described in an organization. Organizations need to be focusing a lot on making people absolutely conscious, making auditors conscious about what's going on, what are the risks, how things can go wrong. Because a little bit like when you are exposed to your unconscious biases, maybe about how you perceive different groups of people from your background, once you are aware of that bias, you have the power to act on it. And I think that's the same in this situation with AI. If I am aware that I could fall into the trap of believing that the powerful AI is all correct and always right, the fact that I know that now means I can be professionally skeptical and ask the question, have I become fooled now into thinking that this powerful tool is always right? What do I now need to know to make me actually comfortable that it is correct? I'll take a quick diversion, if I can, Thomas, into the world of audit evidence. I was watching what I thought was quite a scary news article the other day where they've released the fact that lifelike videos, almost films being created, and you can't tell the difference between it being the real actor or AI. And I think what could be created as audit evidence that is absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so how will we as auditors improve our skill sets to determine real audit evidence from manufactured audit evidence in the future? And only by us thinking about that problem and trying to work out solutions to that problem will we increase the chances of us determining that. In the same way as, simulating phishing attacks can make it far more likely that someone spots a phishing attack for real because their awareness was raised. So for me, in summary, this is a real awareness-raising requirement, helping people spot where the blind spots might be and not getting lulled into false senses of security on some of these solutions.
I think this is highly interesting what you bring up now. As you were talking before about generating the report with AI, my first thought was, yes, that's very helpful for auditors, but at the same time, it can be very helpful for the auditee too, because they can generate the management responses with AI. And as you just bring up now, deepfake or fake the evidence for having been addressed, the actions that had to be addressed in order to mitigate the risks. And I have personally seen deepfake videos in the past from a person I know. I couldn't have told you the difference that this was not the person standing on stage and having that speech. It was so well done. It's unbelievable. So I think that's all other category of risks or topics that we're going to face in the future. So,
and I think there's questions. I think there's questions, Thomas. I mean, I get back to our core auditing skills. We might have to get back to some of the old techniques. You might have to phone the person, and maybe that is also deepfake. But you can phone the person and actually have a conversation. I can call you, Thomas, and say, "I saw a video of you presenting at a conference. Was that you?" And you might say to me, "Never been there."
Mm-hmm.
And I go, "Okay." So there still will be ways for auditors to check. I think they're just going to have to, as I say, raising the awareness makes it more likely that someone says, "How do I know?" Which is no different from if I think back to the days when I started auditing and looking at faxed confirmations of trades that had been done. The question you had to ask was, do I know that this fax came from the other bank? And anyone that knows about the Bearings case, and Nick Gleason will know that, he faxed some confirmations to himself. And, so it was a different way of thinking about a particular problem at a time when fax machines were in use. But it's, for me, very similar way of thinking about some of these problems today of how do I know what I'm seeing is real? And no different to how do I know, as I said, this phishing attack that's in my inbox is email from my sister that says, "Look at these photos." Do I know it's from my sister? Or the photos are not photos, they're code, and someone's hacked her email? I mean, one way I know is when I speak to her and say, "Did you send me some photos?"
Yeah.
And then I know. So I think there's going to be some techniques that people will need to do to keep themselves safe.
And I think that's one of the beauties which I always loved in our profession is like, we are addressing a topic, but we are we have some liberties to think about how are we going to provide or generate assurance, thinking outside the box, being innovative. And as you just mentioned, there's a good chance you're going to do full circle and go back to just calls or even meet them in person if you if you don't trust the call, if you think that could also be faked. It's going to be very interesting to observe how we're going to tackle these challenges in relation to AI and to audit it. So if I understand this right, it's less about being a data scientist, but it's all about thinking like an auditor, as you just said. It's staying curious and teaming up with the right people within your organization in order to create assurance and create value for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we looked, I remember some of these conversations when, the first parts of model auditing were going on and model risk, and it's in a black box. But, functions have become very skilled at auditing models. And I have no doubt that functions have become very skilled at auditing the AI. The investment to be able to do it, I think, is a lot about understanding, as I say, raising the awareness, but also understanding human behavior and how humans interact with some of these tools and working out what can go wrong because of the cognitive biases we have as humans that might lead us to make the wrong decisions, might lead us to be fooled into the false sense of security over some of the outputs.
We call this podcast Governance Unplugged, so let's stay true to the spirit and ask the real question. Where does internal audit actually fit in when it comes to governing AI across the organization? Is it just another emerging risk to monitor, or does it call for a more proactive role in shaping responsible AI governance frameworks within the organization?
I think it's really important for internal audit to be looking at the governance frameworks in the organization. We haven't touched deeply into lots of the risks that the organization faces. I've seen actually a lot of the risks that internal audit faces, but the moment you start to think about what data is going into these systems and the data privacy, does that include customer data, client data? Is that in line with GDPR, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act? Is it, I take one topic there around privacy of data, and you go, we really do want to know that anyone that is building these artificial intelligence solutions is thinking about how they should be using the data, the decision-making over those uses, and all of that screams to me that it needs the right governance framework, the right reporting on those risks, the right level of the organization making the decisions. Same if we come onto thinking about the ethical judgments. What is okay for the organization to say it's good with signing up to? But, some of those ethical decisions aren't just framed in morally what is right. There's laws that protect a lot of those characteristics quite rightly out in the broader society. And so some of those biases could very quickly fall into the categories of race discrimination as a result of the wrong data being used and perpetuating patterns of the past. And so that ethical discussion is broader than just morally right, but also legally allowed as well, and in line with compliance expectations, regulatory expectations. So if anywhere needs to have a right, appropriate governance framework over it, it's going to be how these very powerful tools can be used. I'll do another quick example. I think the more powerful any particular tool is, the more training and the more supervision that should be in place. And I'm thinking about sort of day-to-day household power tools in that situation, but absolutely got to be the same for incredibly powerful generative AI. Really important to have the right monitoring, supervision, knowledge, understanding, seniority of challenge over what's going on.
So maybe one of our most important roles is to voice the uncomfortable questions, the ones that often go unasked, but really needs to be on the table.
Absolutely. I think, along with the professional skepticism, one of the things I think internal audit really has to be doing is prepared to voice the difficult questions that people are not asking. I've talked about it in a previous one of the podcasts about the cleansing power of daylight.
Yeah.
And I really do think the moment something is out in the open and being talked about, there is a much greater chance of the right thing being done than when no one is prepared to raise those topics. And I think there's the same sort of expression in German, but, sweeping them under the carpet.
Yeah, exactly.
And, hiding them out of view in the hope that it really makes them go away. But it's not going to make them go away.
So before we wrap up, here's a tough one. How do we stop artificial intelligence from becoming old style and no substance in internal audit? The kind of thing that sounds cutting edge, but fails to deliver meaningful value.
I think it starts for me with, in any audit function that is saying, where do we need to improve? And they will come up with, as I said at the outset, things which are, we need to spend less time doing this. But that sounds like an efficiency play. We need to have multi-year assurance over this particular risk. Sounds much more like an effectiveness play. And at the point that you've got, we want to be more efficient here, more effective here, then you should really be asking the question, how might some of the artificial intelligence tools help us to achieve those goals? But as I say, being really clear and understanding that you're not mixing up efficiency and effectiveness, and where it's both, you've thought about both angles. And as auditors, we do the right thing and we say, who could do what could go wrong with us implementing that, and have a proper out in the open discussion about it and do whatever is necessary to mitigate those risks. I really do want to emphasize that I think, everyone should be on the path and, working out how to use all of these things. And it's inevitable, as I said, rather than going, well, I think we can wait and not do anything, but really energizing the function about using them safely, getting the benefits whilst mitigating particularly the behavioral risks that go alongside them.
Gavin, as always, a big thank you for this rich and practical exchange. I understand that AI can be a game changer, but only when guided by clear thinking and strong governance. If you had to leave our audience with one core message, what would that be, Gavin?
It's similar to a core message, I think, from one of the other podcasts around focusing on the outcome. Focus on the outcome that you're hoping anything on AI is trying to achieve. Efficiency, effectiveness, or both. When you know the outcome, you can work out, are you doing the right thing to get to that outcome? And avoid the part which is, I feel comfortable because I'm following a process every time that appears to be doing things right. The wrong process done repeatedly does just keep giving the wrong answer. So, outcome always, know whether it's efficiency, know whether it's effectiveness, or know if it's both. And I think it'll really help people to do the right thing.
Gavin, as we come to the end of our conversation, are there any final thoughts, perspectives, or insights you would like to share that we haven't yet covered?
One other thing, Thomas, I think is really important is for people to think about not only what is the outcome that they want from a particular piece of AI, but really what is the expectation they have of the humans that still exist within that process. So I've talked about the audit report example, and the system can generate something really quickly, but clearly my expectation would be that the audit team then read through that audit report to check, is it really communicating to the stakeholders? Is it going to influence them in the way that we want them to be influenced? And there are ways in which you can then build control mechanisms to see, did anyone spend any time on the report after it was generated by the system? Did anything change in the wording of the report? And you can use AI to do some of those checks, but really understanding what it is you want the humans to do in the process as well, and then building the right monitoring frameworks to see whether that happens.
Thank you so much, Gavin. And to all of you tuning in, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Governance Unplugged, where we explored how to use artificial intelligence in internal audit with integrity, purpose, and a forward-looking mindset. I hope this episode helped you reflect more critically and constructively on the evolving role of AI within our profession. Be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast on your preferred platform, be it Apple Podcast or Spotify, and share your thoughts on LinkedIn or visit us at www.keystone-governance.ch. And as always, let's build smarter, more resilient organization, one conversation at a time. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep driving governance excellence.